Hey there, it's Dr. Justin Marcagiani. Welcome back to the podcast. We have Thom King here in the house. He is the author of the book, Gone Keto. We're going to dive into some ketosis topics today. We're going to talk about natural sweeteners that we can incorporate in that aren't going to affect our blood sugar as much. And we're going to just, whatever else may come about. But Thom, welcome to the podcast.
Dr. J, it's such a pleasure being on here. Thank you for having me, and this is truly an honor.
Well, thank you so much. So let's just dive in a little bit and just talk about your book. What inspired you to write this book, Gone Keto? And what are the top 2 or 3 things that you're hoping for the readers to pull out of it?
Well, the book kind of grew organically. So I had, I own a food manufacturing business and an ingredient supply company, and we supply sweeteners to sports nutrition companies. And a lot of those companies actually supply and manufacture ketogenic friendly foods. So I was in Vegas for a trade show and went out with a customer, and they bought dinner, and I way overdid it as usual. Went back to my room at the beautiful Luxor and could not stand to look at myself in the mirror. I was 35 pounds overweight. My blood pressure was like 190 over 99, and I felt like a tremendously huge fraud because I'm catering to that particular industry and not following it all. So at that point, sort of the pain of my, I guess, dishonesty, the pain of my, carrying extra weight and being sluggish and not following any type of discipline had exceeded the pleasure that I was getting out of eating the pizzas and the cake and the wine and everything else. So at that point, I'm like, look, I need to make a lifestyle change. So I really started doing a lot of journaling, and I was doing data collection on my weight, my blood pressure, temperature, all of the data points that I could find, and also like used it as a springboard for discipline. So after about a 6 to 8 month period, I basically had a book on my hands. So I just took it to an editor and we edited it, and it's more about my journey on making a lifestyle change than it is keto. And so the take home, I would say, for your listeners on this, the points that I wanted to, I guess, bring up in the book are you can't actually have a diet. Like, diets are really temporary solutions. In order to get lasting change, you really need to engage in a lifestyle shift. That's one thing. And then the second thing is, what does it take to make a lifestyle shift, and what are the components to the discipline that's required?
Very good points. Yeah, I mean, when I work with patients personally, we're always talking about what's the template, right? The template kind of gives us the flexibility with our macronutrients. And some people may not need a keto template. I think most tend to go better with a lower carb kind of paleo template, so to speak. And typically when your carbs get low enough, you start spitting out ketones as an alternative fuel source. And then there you go. You have the keto diet is kind of off of that. So we can adjust macronutrients in a bunch of different ways. But I think the commonality that needs to be present in all diet or lifestyle shift is we need high amount of nutritional density, a lot of nutrients per bite. We need an anti-inflammatory diet, right? Not the junky omega-6 fats and the trans fats and the high sugar stuff. And then we also need low toxicity, organic, low hormones, all those good things. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, a lot is definitely coming up for me. And so when you're working with your patients and, you are, when you say dense micronutrients, are you referring to like more, like, I would say, like carbohydrates or vegetables, leafy greens, cruciferous vegetables, that have like those micronutrients, and then also, the fiber. Is that what you're talking about in
Yeah.
dense nutrition?
Yeah, absolutely. So of course, like vegetables, bone broth, organ meats are incredibly nutrient dense. If we really look at a lot of the nutrient density, scales that are more out there today, they kind of favor a lot more of the vegetables. But when you really, and they also they have a negative impact for salt and saturated fat, which isn't really fair because that kind of negates the nutrients that are actually found in animal products. But once you kind of control for the sodium and for the saturated fat, and you just look at the nutrients, you'd be surprised at how much nutrition's in like bacon or high quality meat, especially organ meats. It's pretty insane. If you look at the amount of, let's just say, nutrition that's in like 8 ounces of grass-fed meat, you'd have to have 15 cups of kale to equal it. So yeah, so we're
Wow.
looking at the vegetables, we're looking at the high quality meats, and even organ meats too, if possible, because those are super nutrient dense.
Right. And so you also mentioned like anti-inflammatory like
Mhm.
properties of particular foods. And so what I have found in in a ketogenic lifestyle, particularly um, with me, is that I've been getting a lot of my, I guess, fats, some of my fats, but a lot of my proteins from dairy. Whey protein, casein, and stuff like that. What are your thoughts on dairy and inflammation?
Well, I think whey protein is one of these proteins that tends to be, it's lower in casein, about 99% casein free, and also 99% lactose free. So most of the negative effects that you're going to see in dairy are going to be in casein, and they're going to be in lactose, right? You hear lactose intolerance, people can't break it down, they get bloated or gassy. And then
Hmm.
casein tends to be the more inflammatory component. So when you do whey protein, you don't quite get that. Whey protein is a great precursor to glutathione, which is this like awesome master
Hmm.
antioxidant because the amino acids are so sulfur rich. And I think there's a lot of like Weston A. Price talked about, Activator X, which is this vitamin K2 that's commonly found in ghee or grass-fed butter. So I think if you're doing like those good, healthy, higher quality dairy, I think it's better. I think some people tolerate, the milk and the cheese better as well,
Hmm.
especially if it's raw, unpasteurized, those kind of things. I don't even do well with that. I get bloaty and gassy. So I think it's really individual. But if you're gonna do the dairy, you want to make sure it's raw, unpasteurized. But I think the butter and the ghee tend to be awesome, really good.
Interesting. And do you find that fermented dairy is easier to tolerate?
Well, I think fermented dairy is going to be better, but just because you're going to have more B vitamins and more vitamin K2 and such, and it just tends to have more enzymes, and those enzymes are going to help with the processing of the lactose, the processing of the casein. So it's just kind of like pre-digested a lot for you. So I think that's kind of the benefit. But when I'm dealing with patients, like I'm cutting dairy out initially,
Hmm.
but then that's one of the first things we'll add back in are going to be like ghee and then butter. And ghee is just like a more clarified, filtered out butter. It's just less casein, less lactose.
Interesting. And then so don't you need vitamin K2 in order to be able to absorb vitamin D3, right? Is that
Yeah,
right?
it's connected D3 and then A, and then um, vitamin K2 is really important to kind of help escort the calcium into the bones. So we want to have healthy, strong bones as well. And then on that note, I wanted to highlight because you're in the sweetener industry, and I know that you're kind of like you're looking at things like stevia and
Right.
you're looking at monk fruit, which are really interesting. And I've seen a lot of different videos where people are testing their blood sugar, and I've seen it not actually go up. I've seen it actually drop a bit.
Hmm.
What's been your experience with kind of the healthier sweeteners that are out there?
Well, so I'm like huge on data collection, and so part of that data collection is I pull blood continually. So
Mhm.
I'm trying to see where my blood sugar levels are. I'm trying to see where my ketone levels are. So and plus, since I provide ingredients, to food manufacturers, I always make sure that I'm testing, some of our sweetening systems and even the compounds we carry on myself. So like I feel confident when I go in the lab that that what's going out to the consumer uh, is healthy, or at least a healthier
Right,
option. So
right.
what I've done is I've pulled blood sugar, after consuming aspartame, and
Mhm.
I've pulled blood sugar after consuming sucralose. I've pulled blood sugar levels with stevia and monk fruit, and I found that stevia and monk fruit don't affect my blood sugar levels whatsoever.
Yeah,
However, like aspartame and sucralose does. And I'm not sure if it's because of the like dextrose or maltodextrin that they use to,
yes.
to cut it, or another theory that I had, and I think that this might not be too far off, is that your body recognizes things that exist in nature, and you have the ability to metabolize those particular things if it recognizes it. And I think when you put something that's been chemically manufactured, like sucralose, which is a chlorinated sugar molecule, or aspartame, which is a modified phenylalanine,
Yes.
your body doesn't recognize those. It's like, hey, this is super sweet. What do I do with this? I don't know what it is. So you do get the benefit of calorie abatement. But the downside is that your body doesn't really recognize it, and it elicits a insulin response. Have, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think I've seen some of the same data. I know some functional medicine docs that have done like, they on their YouTube page, they said, hey, let's do a study and let's test your blood sugar, fasting 1 hour, 2 hours, 3 hours. Let's compare a regular meal. Then let's add a little bit of stevia to your coffee or to whatever that drink is, and then monk fruit. And I've seen, it's not a scientific study, but, these studies cost millions of dollars to do
Right.
in a formal setting. So I think this is even better because it's instantaneous.
Hmm.
And I've seen people test their blood sugar and then they post their data really showing that it didn't go up, if not dropped.
Hmm.
But my big concern is I think it's a viable alternative and it's something that I use sparingly. The
Hmm.
question is there like a dose dependency where you frequently add it so much where maybe there starts to becoming a problem because you are telling your brain sweet. Now, in
Hmm.
punctuated periods, 20% of the time, 10% of the time, it's probably okay. Do you find if it's frequent all the time that you're starting to increase insulin or your blood sugar may go up over a longer period of time?
I have not found that to be the case with myself. So I
Okay.
actually use both. We have a proprietary sweetener called Keto Sweet, Keto Sweet Plus, and it's actually a blend of allulose, stevia, and monk fruit. And
Allulose is that new sugar alcohol I'm seeing a couple places do. I want to
yeah,
hear more about that later on. I'll plant the seed now. We'll come back to that. That's great.
perfect. That's my go-to sweetener.
Okay.
So, and what I've noticed is over the past few years, when I really, became committed to leading a ketogenic lifestyle, that my desire for sweets actually went down quite a bit, and foods that I would normally have eaten before I started keto, um, just don't, they taste way too sweet to me. Like some of the bars that I used to eat, super sweet. So I think that your palate shifts, when you engage a keto diet, and you don't
Hmm.
have the desire to have
Hmm.
have stevia or monk fruit. As far as like dosage levels go, I mean, we've got scientific papers that we use in conjunction with formulation, and we generally suggest that people stay under 5 to 10 grams of stevia or monk fruit on a daily basis. Um, and that is a lot. That's a lot of stevia and a lot of monk fruit. But
Totally.
at that point, because I've dosed myself to that level, and I've dosed myself to 100 grams of erythritol, I've dosed myself to 100 grams of allulose. And so, I mean, I've tested blood sugar levels, and, also, jotted down notes on, like GI effect, because if you have too many like alcohol sugars, it can definitely cause bloating, cramping, diarrhea, which, nobody wants.
No, that totally makes sense. And I'm just curious. So I like to also see, because I've seen that as well, where the blood sugar is not going up. I'd really like to see what fasting insulin is doing. Is insulin potentially compensating at any level at all? Is insulin rising, even though blood sugar is dropping? Maybe insulin's rising to compensate for that. I'd just be curious. Do you have any data on that?
I don't have any data on that. I mean, I would certainly collect data on that. Is there a way to test for T4 and T3, like a home kit or something like that, without having to go in and pull blood?
With T4 and T3, yeah, there's a couple of labs, ZRT and Meridian Valley Labs definitely have them.
Okay.
And insulin, I think you probably just have to just get like a script and go to like Quest to have that done. And you
Yeah.
throw everything in there with it. But I'd be curious. But I do know that those are going to be things that typically don't increase the blood sugar as much. Now,
Right.
one thing I do notice though is you have some people that may have a negative experience, and I'm seeing just a lot of maltodextrin and corn sugar
Mm.
in some of these sweeteners. What's the deal with that?
It's cheap. So
But doesn't
anytime
it
you,
defeat the purpose though? I mean, people are consuming these products to avoid sugar, and then you have sugar
right.
in it, which is like, what?
Well, I mean, it's that, I think that that's typical in food manufacturing,
Yeah.
that, it's tough because it's people are trying to keep an eye on their cost of goods sold, right? They're trying to keep high margins in the food that they're selling, and maltodextrin and dextrose are so cheap that it's easy to use that as a filler or a bulking agent. So when you look at, typically, like, a high grade sucralose is going to be 700 times sweeter than sugar. So you can't really put something 700 times sweeter than sugar into a little packet, because there'd be a minute, such a small amount, you wouldn't be able to actually detect it. So you do have to use, in those particular situations, bulking agents. And so for larger, manufacturers that don't have, a contingency of consumers, that lean into natural, they're not even going to question, maltodextrin. But
Right.
circuitously getting to the point of, yeah, it's completely counterproductive and counterintuitive to add back a sugar into something you're trying to get the sugar out of. So yeah, it's absolutely 100%.
And it seems like on a liquid, you probably have more ability to manipulate that because it's a liquid, right? You can use a glycerin or some kind of liquid carrier that, you don't necessarily need a bulking agent if you're using liquid drops. So I'm just curious, what's the alternative if you are trying to get it in a powder? What's your company using? What have they found to be better?
We use a lot of different, different sweeteners and different sweetening systems, depending on depending on the functionality and the outcome that the customer is looking for.
Can
Like,
we break down the ingredients in your Keto Sweet product?
sure. So we have a product called Keto Sweet Plus, and it's allulose, stevia, and monk fruit, and we have it both in a powder form and we have it also in a liquid.
Is there a bulking agent though with that at all?
That's the allulose. So we usually
Oh,
use
okay,
the
got it.
allulose as a bulking agent because allulose is only about 70% as sweet as sugar.
I
So in
see.
order to get it to parity with sugar, we add stevia and then we add monk fruit as well. And so what we found is that the combination of stevia and monk fruit actually mask each other's off notes, which is
Ah,
super interesting. And then adding those two high intensity sweeteners to allulose, which is 70% as sweet as sugar, brings it to parity. So our liquid Keto Sweet Plus, I'd say you could compare it to like DE42 high fructose corn syrup, or like
yeah.
any of like Karo or syrup that you would buy, at the store. And then the powder is just very, very similar to sugar. It's not a sugar alcohol. It's actually still considered a saccharide.
Okay.
So think fermentation. So basically,
Yes.
allulose exists in nature in small amounts. It's
Yeah.
considered a rare sugar. And
Hmm.
so basically, you take a fructose molecule and you treat it with an enzyme. So think fermentation.
Yeah.
And then the metabolite after that is a rare sugar called allulose. So an
Mhm.
allulose, your body recognizes it because it exists in nature, but because it's been enzymatically treated, your body is unable to metabolize it. So it just basically goes through the urine and feces and doesn't affect blood sugar levels or ketones. And what I have found is it actually drops your blood sugar levels slightly. And I think it's because of the enzymes that are used to manufacture that. The beauty of the allulose is its functionality. So it participates in Maillard, which is the interaction of proteins and sugar that causes or creates
Mhm.
caramelization. So
Mhm.
using it in the baking process, when you're making cookies or a cake, you're not going to get something that's like a brick. You're actually going to get something
Right.
that's crispy on the outside, fluffy and moist, in the middle. So it has that functionality. And I mean, to me, this is going to be most definitely a game changer.
So this allulose, and I have a couple of dark chocolates too that I do consume that are very low sugar that have allulose as this kind of sugar substitute. So I am seeing that catch on. And allulose is not in the same family as like a polyol, like xylitol or erythritol.
No,
It's just totally different. This is a polysaccharide. You're saying
it is. So
it's
it's
a more
actually
complex sugar. Yeah,
it's actually a monosaccharide, but
monosaccharide, so single
yeah,
sugar.
but it's not, but yeah, it's definitely not at all like an alcohol sugar like xylitol or maltitol or any of
So you
the.
don't get any bloating if you consume too much?
I've dosed myself to 100 grams, which is like 4 times what you should be taking in, probably even more than that. And what I noticed is that I had it created some gas, but it didn't create like cramping or
That's too bad.
laxation. I think that what it was happening is a level of fermentation. So there's probably some bacteria in my gut that's metabolizing it and
Yeah,
off gassing, but it wasn't anything serious. And 100 grams of that is a lot. Like
yeah,
you have to
that
force
is.
yourself to get it into your body.
Yeah, that's like
Um,
3.5 ounces. That's a decent bit for sure.
It is. And so at that point, I would say don't exceed that. I would say if you're going to use allulose or something like that, not to exceed maybe 15 or 20 grams.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. Anything else you wanted to highlight regarding other sweeteners? Is this the only major sweetener you have, or do you have any others? Like, what's your opinion on like the birch bark xylitol? Any other opinions on the sugar alcohols? Anything else you carry similar to that?
Yeah, we carry all of the sugar alcohols. We carry xylitol, we carry
Mhm.
erythritol. And I mean, right now, erythritol is probably our biggest seller. Like we have an erythritol stevia blend, and we are able to process it in an actual powder, so it dissolves into solution better. Companies that manufacture bars that are sort of extruded process are able to use that sweetener, because it does dissolve easier. So, in my opinion, so I have worked quite a bit with polyols. Um, Polyols have a tendency to increase water activity in the lower intestine,
Yeah,
um, which can lead to bloating, cramping,
yeah,
diarrhea. Xylitol, I find, I mean, when you start talking about the maltitols of the world and the
yes,
sorbitols of the world, the laxation effect that those have is pretty extreme.
right.
And I would say stay away from those unless you have really built up a tolerance to sugar alcohols. Xylitol is a little less, but still pretty intense. If you overconsume xylitol, you'll definitely get a laxation effect. And I would say that the sugar alcohol that has the least amount of GI impact is going to be erythritol. And
Okay.
I would still recommend that people stay under 15 grams of erythritol per day.
hmm Yeah, I think the big issue with a lot of these is most are going to come from GMO corn. So you could potentially get that Roundup or that glyphosate pesticide potential trace in there as well, which is common with a lot of the corn processing. But
Right.
the birch bark tends to be a little bit more of, let's just say, the unadulterated form.
Right. Yeah. And we have every one of our raw ingredients that comes in third party tested. So, and I mean, and if you guys are ever like any of your audience are ever going to do business with an ingredient company, you should absolutely 100% demand third party testing and see evidence of the third party testing. And part of our third party testing is to test for like a GMO protein indicator. So we're always looking at, we don't take anything in-house that's GMO at all.
Interesting. I'm just curious, what are you finding I mean, I'm not saying you guys do this, but what have you found in the past when you started testing these things? Did you find any of the Roundup residue? Did you find any lead or metals or mycotoxins? Can you give us some of the bad stuff you found in the past?
Those are awesome questions. And that is why we started doing third-party testing. So, I would say 10 years ago when we just started getting into third-party testing, we would find crazy like shovel handle, glove, like all sorts of adulteration in the products that we were getting. We'd
Hold
see.
on. I want to make sure I heard that. So like meaning like particulate of a shovel handle,
No,
particulate
I
of
mean a shovel handle.
like an actual piece of it in there.
Yeah.
So
And
okay, so I think the whole handle you mean.
no,
In the
probably 6 to 8 inches of the shovel
Oh my
handle.
gosh. How does that
Yeah,
happen? That is
I have
crazy.
no idea. And a glove, like we found a glove. And
Okay, got it.
so, I mean, a lot of these things, I mean, we do visual testing. So all the raw, and this was back in the day, and we would obviously not use those particular
Of course.
suppliers after that, but anything that we bring in now goes into a QC sequester. and and we send it out for third-party testing, which tests for heavy metals, tests for coliform, various like
Yeah,
yeasts, mold,
bacteria. Yeah.
petrochemicals, GMO protein indicators. So we tested all that way, and I would say that our current vendors that we have in place, we don't generally run into issues with them. I would like to also add that everything that comes in and goes out of here runs through a metal detector. So we're able to pull anything out that maybe the smallest piece of metal got into it. But
Yeah.
when we start vetting new ingredient suppliers, I mean, it's a pretty rigorous task for them. They have to give us all of their documents, their organic certs. We send it off for third-party testing. We will bring in, we could just bring in a load from them, and then all of that gets tested. So I wish more companies did that, because we've had products come into our warehouse. Once we send them to third party, boom, they're out of our warehouse. And it's like, no, this isn't what we ordered. So everything has to fall within a spec. And I would really highly encourage your listeners to, and I know that they probably are getting a lot of their supplements through you, and you've already vetted those companies, but
That's
I would
important.
say, oh my God, like I would say that we're just sweeteners. So this is like not a big deal. But when you start looking at companies that are selling supplements and they've got a lot of compounds going in there, absolutely everything should be third party tested, because I know in the supplement industry, 75% of the supplements out there don't even contain any active compounds.
I agree. And this is a problem. And we test all of our
Hmm.
raw ingredients independently. And I found increases in lead in some of these where we
Oh
have to
yeah.
send raw material back. And that can
Hmm.
happen. And of course, you just over time find out who the best ones are
Right.
and where the quality's at. And then, so you're also testing for like Roundup and or GMO type of contamination as well.
Yeah, and petrochemicals and heavy metals. So we test for
Oh,
cadmium and lead.
mhm,
And we've had products come in specifically from China, which is kind of interesting, that are showing up super high in cadmium and lead.
mhm,
So
mhm.
I do a ton of formulation for companies. So companies will send us their product in order for us to push it through our R&D. We've got to have a C of A, and then we also get that third party tested. And I found that there's a lot of pea protein that is out of China that is super high in lead.
Ooh,
And I think it's just because of the amount of petrochemicals that are in the air and then settle out into the soil. So
yes,
so we test for all of those things.
totally.
And occasionally we find something, but the more rigorous our testing has become, the more we're able to weed out the suppliers that are unscrupulous.
Yeah, very good. Now, we talked a little bit earlier about some of the benefits of being ketogenic earlier on the thyroid. I want to just kind of piggyback to that because you were asking me some questions in the pre-interview, like, who's going to benefit from a ketogenic diet on the thyroid side? And this is a question I get a lot because you have some data of people saying, well, my thyroid gets worse or weaker on a
Mm-hmm.
ketogenic template and some gets better. And I think a lot of it has to do with how insulin resistant, how numb someone's cells are to insulin. So the more numb you are to insulin, your body has to compensate by making more insulin to overcome that numbness. And I think that's the big issue and kind of the physiological imbalance that's driving a lot of issues with people's health and thyroid. And finding healthier sweeteners, like you mentioned, getting the carbs down can really really increase the sensitivity, meaning it lowers the insulin,
Mm-hmm.
and that allows thyroid conversion to happen better because insulin's a big blocker of thyroid conversion if it's too
Mm-hmm.
high. Just answering that question.
Right. Yeah. And I found that with myself. So I was carrying about 35 pounds of extra weight. And I was definitely insulin resistant. And so I did show a depleted T4, when I started, and then that T4 leveled out. But I'm not sure, like on a real long-term basis, how the thyroid will be affected. I test, like I do a Dutch test,
Yeah.
and like I do
Hmm.
a full blood panel Dutch test, and then I also do stool sample once a month
Yeah.
to track my microbiome.
Oh, cool.
So yeah, I'm like really, so really found some interesting stuff in this data collection that I've done. But I found that the ketogenic diet really did help my insulin resistance, and I became more sensitive. But I would have like a question, I guess. Do you have any experience with berberine with your patients?
Yeah, I mean, I use berberine a couple different ways. With some patients, it's typically used in my SIBO clearing programs where we're trying to knock down SIBO or bacterial overgrowth.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a bunch of different berberines: golden seal, Oregon grape, barberry, those kind of things. Obviously, yeah, berberine HCl. But berberine is also a really good insulin sensitizing compound. It can really help lower your blood sugar and lower your insulin level. So there's some really good benefits there as well.
Right, because I added that as a supplement, and I almost wonder if that was, if that really helped me
Mhm.
become more, more sensitive to insulin. And another thing too is I'd like to hear your thoughts on metformin.
Yeah, I think berberine kind of works similar in a similar way. It helps us on the insulin sensitizing side. Metformin's going to work more by decreasing like the glucose absorption in the gut, and then it also kind of shuts down gluconeogenesis in the liver. Part of that decrease in the glucose absorption, though, it can also decrease the absorption of B12. So if you're
Oh,
on metformin or glucophage, you really want to be on some supplemental B12 on top of it. And then, metformin's relatively natural. Like the extract from metformin comes from the French lilac flower. So
hmm
it's kind of on the natural side. But I tend to like be more impartial for like the berberines and the other more nutrient based insulin sensitizing
hmm
compounds. But if people are on it, you just got to make sure the B12's dialed in there too.
Interesting. And do you feel like getting a B12 supplement with it, or just increasing the amount of like organ meat would suffice?
I just make sure you're on at least a good multi with some extra B12 on top of a really good diet.
Mm, interesting.
And again, you can monitor that with your functional medicine doc. Like, I like methylmalonic acids are a really good test to look at to assess your B12 levels. When methylmalonic acid goes high, that actually means lower B12, right? Methylmalonic acid gets metabolized to succinic acid. And so you need B12 to make this conversion happen. So if there's not enough B12, methylmalonic acid goes up because you don't have that B12 to convert it. So that's something to keep in mind. If people are going to be on it, you want to be careful because low B12 can cause Alzheimer's, dementia-like symptoms.
Interesting. And then, so do you find like with your patients that taking these vitamins and supplements orally, or do you feel that there's greater efficacy in IVs?
Well, I think IVs are good. The problem is they're impractical for people to do daily. That's the only issue.
Mm-hmm.
Just because, people got to work, they don't have, 30 or 40 minutes to get dripped, and they can be more expensive. But
Right.
IVs here and there, I think, can be really good. But ideally, you want good food, and supplements are just easier to take daily.
Definitely.
And that's the big benefit. If I see patients that do have a lot of gut issues, then we will go on the sublingual B12 side. And that can really help too, because you can kind of get more of the absorption via the oral mucosal kind of buccal tissue versus the gut. And that can help too.
Wow. Awesome.
And then I'm just curious,
Yeah.
what other key things, you wrote the book, Guy Gone Keto, and then you also
Right.
have come up with some of these great sweeteners. What other cool tools are out there that you found kind of in your transition to a healthier diet and making a lot of these health changes that really impacted you?
I would have to say that the thing or modality that had the greatest impact, or but I found was the lent itself to the success that I had, was probably journaling.
Mm,
So, that is, and being mindful. So when I get up in the morning, one of the first things I do, grab a cup of coffee, sit down, and I start to journal. And I journal with real intention of things I want to manifest. I do some data collection, like my weight and blood pressure. So I think journaling was really, really, really huge, and really taking time to do that first thing in the morning sets the stage for your day. And then within that, I incorporated what I call my hour of power.
yep.
Um, Journaling, run, cycling. I do TRX, and then every other day I do yoga, and then I finish up my workout with a meditation. And I think that those were the things that actually helped me the most.
That's really good to hear. That's excellent. That sounds like like a little Tony Robbins kind of morning program there. That's what it
I'm
sounds like.
totally influenced by Tony Robbins.
That's cool. And then I'm just curious too, just to kind of piggyback on a couple things. Where do you guys source your Allutol from? I mean, like not like what company, but like what's the raw ingredient it comes from?
You mean the allulose?
Yeah, I'm sorry, allulose. I said Allutol, allulose.
I
Correct.
know, but that's would be an interesting compound. That sounds like the the
Yeah,
mix of erythritol and
allulose.
allulose.
Exactly,
Um,
totally.
so I've been working with allulose for the past 5 years, and part of it
Mm,
was so new that the supply chain really wasn't there, and
yeah,
we weren't really able to verify stuff. So we won't add something as an ingredient unless we're 100% confident that the supply chain is solid and also reliable. Like everything is that arrives is within spec. So the allulose, we've got 3 different suppliers, and all 3 of those suppliers are using non-GMO corn fructose substrate to enzymatically create the allulose.
got it. So it's corn fructose, but it's GMO free, and they're
Correct.
extracting. Are they able to separate the sugar from the protein component pretty well?
I think so. I mean, because when we third-party test, we're not showing any proteins.
Oh, good.
Um, so, I mean, I don't have any reason to believe that there's any problems with it, with them separating it. I know that they use like what's called resin column filtration, so it pulls out like any of the impurities. So yeah, I mean, we've been working with it for a while, and we third-party tested, and we haven't found any proteins in it to indicate that there's the genetically modified corn was used in that process.
So if someone was gluten sensitive and wanted to keep grains out, you'd feel like it would be filtered enough where it wouldn't be a problem for them.
Well, we're also allergen free facility, so we test for gluten, and absolutely allulose is gluten free.
Good. And if they were sensitive to corn, like the corn protein, like the zein protein, you feel like it'd be filtered enough where there wouldn't be an allergenic reaction to it.
Yeah, well, because we test for proteins and
Just
there's no proteins left in there. So
got
I would feel confident that yeah, that people that are sensitive to that would not, be affected by it.
very cool. Well, we're gonna have to put some links down below where people can find the Keto Sweet Plus formula.
Oh.
Anything else, Tom, you wanted to highlight for the listeners here?
No, not really. You were the questions you asked were totally thorough, and I appreciate that.
Well, I appreciate you coming on. Anything else you want to leave the listener with for just how they can find more about you and more about your products too?
Well, if you want to get a copy of the book, and we also have we released a line of ketogenic condiments like ketchup, barbecue
Oh,
sauce, and
cool.
teriyaki sauce. And so if you just go to Gone Keto, you can find all of that.
Great.
You can reach me through that too. All of the social medias under just Thom King, ThomKing. Reach out to me if you ever have questions. If they want to buy the Keto Suite, I think the Keto Suite Plus is available on the Gone Keto site. It's also available on Steviva.com. That's STEVIVA.com. We have all of our compounds on there available for retail. And if they want to see what kind of madness we're up to in our lab, they can go to iconfoods.com and follow us on LinkedIn, and you can see some of the craziness that goes on in our lab, things we're inventing.
Very cool. And is it possible to cook with the Keto Sweet Plus?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. So it does actually participate in Maillard at a lower temperature, meaning that like with sucrose or table sugar, probably about
Hmm.
145 to 155 is where it starts to caramelize. And you're going to notice that you're going to get that a little sooner
Hmm.
with allulose, probably in the 130 to 135 range.
Hmm.
So you
Hmm.
probably want to cook and bake at a little lower temperature for a little extended period of time. But
Hmm.
then, other than that, yeah, you can cook and bake just like you would with sugar.
Awesome, Tom. Well, thanks for all the great information here today. Appreciate it. And you have a phenomenal day.
Thanks. You too, Dr. J. Thanks for having me on.
Thank you. Bye now.
You're welcome.